Gonna get started here in just a second. People are not sure where to go, so I'm just directing them to the right place. Apparently people can't hear me. Let me pull up the hashtag. So it's the first time we're trying this behind the paywall, so probably going to be a bug or two, but I'm sure we'll get it right here in just a second. If you notice, Matt Friedman isn't with me right now. He had to take care of something really quick last minute, so unable to be with us today. So it'll just be me running the show. I'll be the one answering, reading, and answering all your questions. And we will have a good show, I'm sure of it. It's going to be a lot of fun. So, like I said, I'm just about to get started here. And I'm going to have to make sure I keep my mentions page open as well, because people are probably going to be asking me where they can find the stream and stuff like that. So, sorry for a little maintenance here, but we're going to get started one more time real quick right here. Give it a retweet, and we are good. Okay, you are listening to the April 30th, 2017 edition of RotoViz Live, the NASCAR DFS podcast powered by RotoViz Radio. Really appreciate all of you guys tuning in. It's behind the paywall, and it's behind the paywall and everything like that, so this is for subscribers only. Really excited to be doing this for you guys. We're going to have a great show, I am sure of it. So, a lot of stuff to get to. A couple drivers moving to the back. Well, actually only one major driver moving to the back, and that is Joey Logano. So Joey Logano qualified 5th, and for DraftKings scoring purposes, he will be scored from 5th. However, he will be starting in the back. So he will be starting all the way in the back, 38th place, but for DraftKings scoring purposes, he will be scored as if he's starting in 5th place. So make sure that you understand that he will essentially be starting with a minus 33 place differential at the very start of the race, right? So it's going to be tough for him to lead any laps. It's going to be tough for him to get all the way to the front, but if he does get to the front, that's going to be certainly a contrarian play, a very contrarian play. So, what are the odds that he ends up dominating a portion of the race? Probably 5-10% tops, I think, because he is starting all the way dead last. The furthest back anybody's ever won at Richmond is starting from 31st. So it's going to be a tall order for Logano coming from 38th to win the race, let alone dominate a portion of the race. And you're really only going to want him in your lineups if you think he's going to dominate a portion of the race, because he's not going to get a ton of place differential. Remember, he scored from 5th. So the most amount of place differential points he can get is 4. And obviously, you want him to have a high finishing position as well with his high salary. So it's a tough ask. So Logano probably only a 5% tops type play this weekend. The other guy that's moving in the back is also the guy who starts in the back, and that's Austin Dillon. He qualified 38th. He will be starting 38th. So, scored from 38th for DraftKings. He's a lock for cash games. I mean, this guy can finish inside the top 20. So that's, 20 possible place differential points. I think Austin Dillon is just a fine cash game play today. We'll get into a lot about GPP theory on what to do around Dillon. We'll get into all of that stuff. So before we do that, I just want to remind everybody that if you aren't already subscribed, well, I guess at this point, you can't really get the 30% discount because you're already subscribed. But if you aren't subscribed for a full season, make sure to sign up for a full season using the 30% discount, rotoviz.com/NASCAR podcast. That will get you unlimited access to all of my premium content, my articles, my apps, the Optimizer app, the Splits app, the Sims app, my articles, my ownership projections, and, of course, this video that we do every week for the rest of the season. So if you're only a weekly subscriber, make sure to bump that up to the rest of the season. That's $70 for the rest of the season if you use the 30% discount. So that's great. I mean, we're talking, we've got about 30 races left in the season or so, a little under, right around 30 races left in the season. So you're only talking $2.33 per race. So hopefully you guys signed up for that discount if you haven't yet. Anyway, let's get on to your questions. We've got a lot of hashtag RV Live questions coming in, so I'm just going to start all the way from the beginning. And so at first, the first question that we've got here is kind of a tongue-in-cheek question from Fantasy Genius, Jeanynus. He's a good guy. Hashtag RV Live, how many positions on each pit stop will Eric Jones' pit crew cost him this week? It's actually a joke question, but it is true. Eric Jones' team has struggled in the pits. Some of it might be the fact that he's a rookie. Some of it might be the fact that it's the pit crew. Can't really tell which. Need to learn more, but definitely Eric Jones' pit crew has cost him some spots in the pits the past couple of races. If that trend continues, it makes him really tough to be a driver that can dominate the race. Now, he is 8,100. He is starting pretty far back in 20th position. So he's not a bad play by any means this week in GPPs. It's just a matter of if his pit crew keeps costing him positions, it's going to be hard for him to get a top 5. Certainly top 10s and things like that are possible, but he really is going to need his pit crew to shine to get a top 5 this week. And, I think he ends up in the winning lineup if he gets a top 8 or 10. So certainly there's some possibility there for Eric Jones to be in the winning lineup. I like him as a GPP play. Hashtag RV Live. Every week I eliminate the 10 worst rated drivers by track according to the Splits app. Is that strategy too conservative? No, I think that's a really good strategy. If you find some drivers that you just think aren't a good fit for the track, you're more than welcome to eliminate them. Now, we always want to make sure we're doing things the right way. So if they have a bad track fit, but then they are practicing amazing, you don't want to eliminate them. I mean, I think a prime example of that was last week we talked about how Martin Truex Jr., how Bristol wasn't the greatest fit for him. He's only got a second place best finish there. He hasn't really led a lot of laps, and then all of a sudden he dominated at Bristol last week, so he had a very good car. So you don't want to just eliminate a guy because he's bad at a track, but it is a good place to start, especially if they're also not practicing well. So I'm going to just kind of continue to flip through with all these different hashtag RV Live questions. Next one is hashtag RV Live, trying to figure out some fades. Curious what the R squared of the model was this week. Is there less volatility here? This is a medium volatility track. It's certainly no Bristol. It's certainly no Martinsville where there's a lot of volatility, a lot of crashes, but it's also not the most predictable track. It's not your Charlottes. It's not even Phoenix. Even though this is the closest comparable track to Phoenix, it's not Phoenix. It's a little less predictable than Phoenix. So the model R square is about 0.5. And then who are some good fades? Well, of course, Joey Logano, as we talked about, is a good fade. I think there is a really interesting game theory situation around Logano, though, where if he is 5% owned, but maybe there's a 7 or 8% chance he dominates the race, then maybe you want to play him a little bit, like in one lineup out of 10 or something. Just some theory there. I probably still think he's the strongest fade on the board. I mean, he is the strongest fade on the board. I think he's probably still a strong 100% fade if you want to go that route as well. But, it is Team Penske. They do like to do pit strategy. Maybe they'll stay out, or maybe they'll do 2 tires while everybody else does 4, knowing Logano's all the way in the back. Maybe they extend a fuel mileage run. Different things like that to try to get Logano some track position, since track position is so important at Richmond. Other good fades, Stenhouse is a decent fade. I think he's going to have to finish in the top 8 to be in the winning DraftKings lineup. What is the odds that he finishes in the top 8? Maybe 15%, something like that. So if you want to go about 15% on Stenhouse, I think that's okay. Maybe even up to 20%. But if you want to go underweight on him, completely fade him, I totally understand that, because there's a much greater probability that he doesn't end up inside that top 8 finishing positions. So certainly he's been a lot stronger this year, a lot better. And the whole Roush Fenway team has been. So, Stenhouse is a decent fade. You can go 100% fade, or you can go 15-20% on him. I don't mind that. I would not go any higher than that. Certainly, he's not strong enough of a play there to go too overweight on him. Hashtag RV Live. Does Kyle Busch and Kevin Harvick's final practice times concern you for today's race? They were 15th and 26th, respectively, in the single lap time. Now, so yes, Harvick was 26th. And then the other one was, let's see, who are we talking about? Oh, Kyle Busch, right. So, and then, yes, Kyle Busch was 15th in the single lap, and Harvick 26th. If you look at their 10-lap times, Kyle Busch was 8th. Harvick was a little bit better as well than his single lap. He went from 26th to 22nd. We know Harvick likes to have a comfortable car, but I'm not so sure they're super fast. Rodney Childers tweeted out that, he's about one of 8 or 9 cars that are all the same speed. I think that's kind of code for we're not the fastest here. So I don't mind fading Harvick, but he is Kevin Harvick. He can find a way to adjust that car. He does have a lot of talent. They'll probably take some swings at it overnight. So I don't think he's a complete fade, but certainly a low-owned play is not bad. Kyle Busch, on the other hand, I'm not concerned. He had the fastest 30-lap average, so he is a very good long-run car. You can see from his single lap was only 15th, his 10-lap was 8th, his 30-lap was 1st, that he just gets better and better over the long run compared to some other people. For example, Kyle Larson, who struggled over the long run. Kyle Larson would burn up his tires early in a run. This is also not one of Kyle Larson's best tracks, despite him winning the Xfinity Series race yesterday. He did have a little bit of luck, a little bit of good fortune. He put himself in a position to benefit from that luck, of course, but this isn't one of his best tracks. However, he did have some very fast times. First in the single lap, third in the 10 lap. So you kind of see the trend there, maybe getting slightly worse as the run goes on. So certainly in the short run, Larson has a better car than Kyle Busch, and Kyle Busch probably has the better car in the long run than Kyle Larson. So not concerned about Kyle Busch. I think there's a chance if we get some long green flag runs that he ends up dominating a portion of the race if he gets out front, and also if his pit crew does a good job there. So, that's kind of where I stand on Kyle Busch and Kevin Harvick. Hashtag RV Live. Are you fine with fading Logano, Harvick, and Kyle Busch? So again, 3 of the drivers we already talked about. I'm not fading Kyle Busch, given that 30-lap average. I'm not even fading Harvick completely, although I definitely understand having a low ownership percentage on him. I just think there's going to be this theory play where a lot of people are off of Harvick. Maybe he only goes 15% owned. I think my model has him projected... let's see, where does my model have Harvick projected? About 18% owned. So I think there's a room for error there. Maybe he's down at 10, 15% ownership, and maybe there actually is a 20, 25% chance he ends up winning a winning lineup. So I might go a little overweight on Kevin Harvick, just because I think the field might go underweight relative to his probability of being in the winning lineup. Now that said, I'm not going to go crazy on Harvick or anything like that. Definitely fine with fading Logano, as we talked about at the top of the show. Hashtag RV Live. What do we do with... Okay, so that's the Logano question. I'm going to skip that one. Hashtag RV Live. Is Eric Almirola cash game viable? Yeah, he's cash game viable. Certainly, he qualified in 25th position. He's down at 6,200, which is a nice price for him. He had decent practice times. He was 20th in the single lap, 20th in the 10-lap average. So there is cash game appeal to Eric Almirola. It's going to be hard, though, if you want to fit Austin Dillon, if you want to fit Trevor Bayne in, then some of these Dominator-type guys. It's definitely going to be tough to get Eric Almirola in. It's not impossible. I mean, maybe you do a lineup like a Dillon, a Bayne, and an Almirola, and then 3 more expensive guys. So that's certainly a possible roster construction. But I think in that case, you're kind of foregoing Matt Kenseth in cash, which is totally fine, actually. I did write up Matt Kenseth as a cash game play because I do think that gives you the highest floor. But if I were to play 3 cash game lineups, I'd probably have Kenseth in 2 of them and not all 3 of them, because I do think there's a chance, given his practice speeds, given how good Truex has been here in practice so far, given how many different drivers could dominate this race, I think there's a decent chance that Kenseth doesn't end up in a great finishing position and not necessarily even dominates a portion of this race. So I don't mind actually fading Kenseth in cash games this week, even though I wrote him up. I'm certainly 50-50 on him. If I were to play 4 lineups, I'd probably have him in 2 of 4. But I think if you're playing 1 lineup, you probably got to go with him simply because everybody's going to be going with him. And if he does end up dominating the race, you're going to be behind the 8 ball. So I think if you're playing 1 lineup, you probably got to go with Kenseth for cash game lineups. So I kind of got a little tangential there. Of course, the question was about Eric Almirola in cash games. But, it really depends on your roster construction. Yes, he is viable in cash games. Hashtag RV Live, what are the pros and cons of fading Austin Dillon today? That's a really good question because in cash games, it's going to be so hard to fade him. But in GPPs, I can see some scenarios where he doesn't get as far forward as he wants. Maybe he only finishes 25th. Maybe he finishes 22nd. That's going to be, let's say he finishes 22nd. That's 22 points for finishing position and 16 points for place differential. That's 38 points. I don't think that's going to be enough from a driver that's priced at 7,400 to be in the winning lineup. So I certainly think there are scenarios where Austin Dillon doesn't end up in the winning lineup. Obviously, he could also get caught up in a crash. He could blow a tire. He could have an engine problem. He could have a pit road speeding penalty near the end of the race. All sorts of things could happen to set him back. That said, the most likely outcome is that he still ends up in the winning lineup. I'd say it's greater than 50%, but probably less than 75%. So somewhere in that range, if you're kind of going with the GTO, multi-entry theory, somewhere between 50 to 70, 70% ownership, I think, is probably where I would want to be on Austin Dillon. Next question, hashtag RV Live. 2 drivers that I cannot decide whether to fit into lineups or not are Harvick and Blaney. Are either worth forcing into lineups? So I did talk about Harvick a little bit. Just going to reiterate that point. I think he's worth playing in some of your lineups because Harvick can do things that Harvick can do. He's just not a super strong play this week, I think, with his practice times. But we've seen him have slow practice times in the fast and still end up with one of the fastest race cars. But I'm kind of reading between the lines on his crew chief, Rodney Childers' tweet again. Doesn't look like he's the strongest. Now, again, that doesn't mean they can't take a swing at things and try to make changes. Plus, Harvick's Harvick, so I do think you have to have some exposure to him. Ryan Blaney is interesting. This is a driver that, if Matt Kenseth somehow doesn't get the strongest restart, I can see Blaney leading the opening laps until maybe Truex catches him. Blaney did pass on the outside. I think it was the Texas race. Blaney made some strong passes on the outside to dominate there. So over Harvick even. So I think Blaney has a good chance, not a great chance, but a good chance of getting past Matt Kenseth on the opening restart here at Richmond. So, I can see Blaney being maybe a 15, 20% type ownership play. I think my ownership projections, have him closer to 10%, but I think possibly, he ends up maybe closer to 15 or 20% because people do like playing those guys starting on the outside of the front row. So I think that's about fine. I think 15 to 20% on Blaney is fine. I think even if you want to go higher, maybe, or you want to play him in your single entry or your 3 max type ones instead of your super large field, I think that's also where you can get an advantage because I think in the single entry, the 3 max, a lot of people will want to play either Kenseth or Truex, the guys that seem to be the most likely to dominate. So I think that's an interesting theory play by playing Blaney in your single entry lineups instead of maybe your massive field GPPs. Of course, there's also appeal to playing him in the massive field GPPs, I guess. If he does dominate, not a lot of people are going to have him, and that's a huge prize pool you could win. So, either way, I like going with him maybe in the single entry or the 3 max. We talked about this, hashtag RV Live. Is there any way Austin Dillon will not be in the winning lineup? Yeah, definitely it's possible. I think, like I said, anywhere from 25 to 50% chance he's not in the winning lineup. Again, maybe he just doesn't get far enough forward. Track position's so important at Richmond. Or maybe he gets caught up in something or has a penalty, etc. Hashtag RV Live. Who will be most owned, and who do you like best for GPPs? Eric Jones, Casey Kane, or Blaney? Or Barney, it says. Brian Blaney, I think it meant. So who will be the most owned? Obviously Dillon, Trevor Bayne, I think Martin Truex Jr., and probably Matt Kenseth will be the highest owned drivers. So that's, sorry there, I knocked my computer over. So that's about 4 or 5 drivers that, I can pretty comfortably say will be in the top 5 or 6 in ownership percentage. So those will be the highest owned. As of your drivers, which 3 do I like in GPP between Eric Jones, Casey Kane, and Blaney? I think I like Eric Jones the most, Casey Kane second most, and Blaney the third most. Obviously, with Blaney, you're going to want him to finish inside that top 5 and possibly even pick up a few laps led, whereas Jones and Kane have some place differential potential there that they can move forward. They both also had some pretty decent practice times. So I like Eric Jones first, Casey Kane second, Ryan Blaney third. Hashtag RV Live, sound working now. Okay, that was from the start of the show. Hashtag RV Live, who's the best contrarian dominator today? Best contrarian dominator. I mean, I did talk about Blaney a little bit. I think there's certainly a chance if he jumps that initial start over Kenseth, he could dominate a portion of this race. I still think Truex is most likely to overcome him in the long run. You've got Kyle Busch. If you want a contrarian dominator, maybe somebody like Chase Elliott, who was 5th on the single lap, 5th on the 10-lap average, looks to have a strong car. He's starting 14th, so he doesn't look like he has a ton of dominator appeal from there, but I certainly think he comes forward. He's been very strong this year. He's dominated multiple races, portions of multiple races, so I like Chase Elliott as a contrarian dominator. Hashtag RV Live. Who is your ultimate GPP play today? I don't know if there's an ultimate one. I like a couple. I did mention Chase Elliott there. I think Kurt Busch is intriguing at only 7,700 at the 16th highest priced driver. Now, if we go ahead and look at Kurt Busch's practice times, he was 6th in the single lap, but 29th in the 10-lap average. I wouldn't worry about that. He made his 10-lap average run later in the session when the track was a lot slower, so I wouldn't worry about Kurt Busch's 10-lap time. It's going to be hard to judge for him where he falls in terms of long-run speed because he did make his run later in the race, but Kurt Busch is very good at Richmond. He's got a top 5 driver rating here last year. If we take Richmond and Phoenix, then he's got a top 5 driver rating in all of the Richmond and Phoenix races over the last 2 years as well, which is 8 total races. So that's a decent sample size. So I don't mind Kurt Busch as a GPP play. I don't know if he's the ultimate GPP play. I did mention Elliott. Casey Kane, I think, is a good one, as we talked about. Finally, I think you can maybe go with some of these Joe Dirt cheap guys. If you want to go with like a roster construction, we have 4 expensive guys. I certainly don't mind Landon Castle. He looks to be the best of the Joe Dirt cheap drivers this week. He's got the 27th best single lap, 23rd in 10-lap average. I think there's potential for him to move up a little bit from that 28th starting spot. Menard's been slow, so I think he can move ahead of Menard, for example. He can move ahead of Ty Dillon, some of these drivers starting in front of him. He can move ahead of Michael McDowell. So I think there's some place differential potential for Landon Castle. And then if you get a couple of drivers who fall out due to wrecks and stuff like that, he could end up with a top 20, maybe definitely a top 25, but possibly even a top 20 finish if he keeps his nose clean. A couple other Joe Dirt cheap drivers, Corey LaJoie and Greg Galding are guys. If you really want to go these bizarro roster constructions, the winning lineup last week, had 4 expensive guys. In the $3 tournament, it had 4 expensive guys, the 4 dominators, Jimmy Johnson, Joey Logano, Martin Truex Jr., and Kyle Larson, and then it also had Cole Witt and Corey LaJoie. So that was a really interesting roster construction in that $3. It wasn't the winning lineup in the 33, but that's because there's obviously less total entries, so nobody ended up on that lineup. But if there is something like that happens again this week, there's a lot of drivers, expensive drivers, starting a bit further back in that 15 to 18 starting range. You've got Keselowski, Hamlin, Johnson, and Larson all starting next to each other in that 15 to 18 range. Then if you add in a couple expensive dominators and one of those guys, like I mentioned, in 15 to 18 comes forward, suddenly you might be in this construction where you want to go with a Corey LaJoie or a Greg Galding or a Landon Castle. Certainly not out of the realm of possibility. So long answer to the ultimate GPP play today, but those are some of my GPP plays that I have been using. Hashtag RV Live. Not sure why your model is so high on Keselowski. He seems really slow to me. The model is definitely a little too high on both Keselowski and Logano. That's just an issue with the fact that laps led and fastest laps are hard to model. Think of those more as probabilities than of actual laps led or fastest laps. So like if Keselowski's slated to lead 40 laps, that's only 10% of laps. So really think of that as like a 10% chance that he actually ends up leading some laps. That's the way I like to think of it instead of the exact number. It's just really hard to model laps led because it's such a wonky distribution. It's not a normal distribution, so it's very hard to model. I would tend to ignore the laps led and the fastest laps, more look at finishing position, and then find drivers you think will dominate probabilistically. So, right, Truex is the most likely to dominate. Kenseth probably the second most likely driver to dominate, etc. So think of dominators that way instead of looking at the raw point totals. So one of the things I like to do is in my projections, take out the laps led and the fastest laps, so back calculate those points with those removed, and then just look at the finishing position and the place differential points, and then from there figure out which drivers you want to also add in as dominators. Got a lot of questions. This is very good. So hashtag RV Live. What do we do with Ricky Stenhouse this week? I think he's tough to play him. I think, like I said, maybe 15, 20% chance that he ends up in that top 8 finishing position. So if he finishes 8th, that's going to be 36 points for finishing position, subtract 4 for place differential, 32. He'll probably get a handful of fastest laps, so 35 points maybe, 36. That's probably not enough for Stenhouse. So, 20% chance tops, I think, that he ends up in the winning lineup. So I wouldn't use a ton of Ricky Stenhouse this week. How much Bane is too much Bane? I think it's the same question with Austin Dillon. And I like Bane a little bit better than Dillon. First of all, Bane had better practice times than Dillon, both in the single lap and in the 10-lap average. So, Trevor Bayne had 13th single lap, 15th 10-lap average, whereas Dillon had 24th single lap, 18th 10-lap average. Bayne also starts 9 spots further forward, which I think is kind of not negligible, but somewhat negligible in terms of that, because if Bayne finishes 9 spots ahead of Dillon, then he's going to have 9 points more than Dillon, and he's still cheaper than Dillon. So, he's practiced about 6 to 8 spots better than Dillon, depending on whether it's single lap or 10 lap, anywhere from like 3 to 11 spots better. So if let's say we split the difference there, finishes 7 spots better than Dillon, well, he's still going to have 7 points or 5 points more than Dillon, and he's cheaper than Dillon. So Bayne is the better play than Dillon this week, in my opinion. I like Bayne better. Dillon has more upside. If he and Bayne were to finish, 10th and 11th, then Dillon would definitely get more points. He's also more expensive, so he has more upside, but I think the probability of hitting that upside is a little lower than Bayne is more like fat tails, but his fat tails kind of stop shorter, whereas Dillon has really skinny tails towards that upside distribution. I like Bayne a little bit better than Dillon this week, just in terms of overall percentage of my exposure in GPPs. Hashtag RV Live. Only build 5 to 7 lineups. How many drivers should I build lineups around? Just mix and match 12 to 15 drivers. I think that's about right. I would maybe do about 12 to 15 drivers if you're doing only 5 to 7 lineups. If you're doing, 75 lineups, then I certainly think you need to expand beyond that a little bit. Have a strong core of 8, 10, 12 drivers, but then you can mix and match another 5 or 10 in there. So, but I think with only 5 to 7 lineups, I probably wouldn't want to go much beyond 12 to 15 drivers. Hashtag RV Live. Who will be this week's Truex? I guess that means the contrarian dominator. So we talked about that a little bit. I think it'll probably be maybe Chase Elliott. It could be Denny Hamlin. It could be Kyle Busch. A bunch of different guys could dominate this race that aren't Truex. I think if we want to go the route of bad practice times, Truex didn't have bad practice times last week. He had mediocre ones, like 9th and 14th, I think, which aren't bad. But I think if you want to talk like that, maybe Kyle Busch is the contrarian dominator, 14th in the single lap, 8th in the 10 lap. But of course, if we go to that 30 lap, he's the best. So Kyle Busch is maybe our this week Truex. Hashtag RV Live. Not hearing much talk on Keselowski. Top driver rating at Richmond and 4 top 10s in the last 8. Any love? Certainly, Brad Keselowski is not a guy that is a strong play this week, I think, because of those practice times. And it's not just Keselowski. It's the whole Penske team has been underpowered, I guess. Not underpowered, maybe that's the wrong term, but just hasn't found the speed in practice. So, you've got Keselowski there who practiced 14th and 17th in single and 10 lap. You've got Logano who practiced, where is he? 22nd and 16th, so not that great either. And then you've got Ryan Blaney who practiced 17th and 12th. So those 3 like Penske or Penske affiliated drivers, none of them had times inside the top 10 in the single lap or the 10 lap average. Maybe they're setting something up for later in the race. Certainly that's a possibility. So if you want to do a contrarian stack, maybe like a Blaney Keselowski contrarian stack, I don't think you can put Logano in there given his situation. But I think a Blaney Keselowski contrarian stack is not a terrible play. I just wouldn't do a lot of that because the practice times are kind of warning us that they're not as fast as they should seem. So, we can't rule out Brad Keselowski's track history. He's been very good at Richmond for sure. Ryan Blaney has been good at these small flat tracks, these D-shaped oval flat tracks that are smaller in his Xfinity career, so Iowa, Phoenix, and Richmond. But in the Cup career, he hasn't been that good at Richmond. So just an interesting thing there. But I don't think if you're doing maybe 20 lineups, I don't think one lineup with Blaney and Keselowski as a contrarian stack is a bad play at all. I certainly think that's a viable play for a contrarian stack. Hashtag RV Live. I made a cash line. 5 great drivers with a complete punt. 5,500 too low for cash. I'm not sure I completely understand the question. Oh, so 5 expensive drivers and then a punt at 5,500 is a punt too low for cash, I think is the question. No, I don't think it's a terrible roster construction. I just don't know what you mean by great drivers. Like if you're talking Austin Dillon, I wouldn't consider him a great driver, but I think he's a guy you really need to have in your cash game lineups. Hashtag RV Live. Austin Dillon too chalky for GPP. A contrarian fade, or is that overthinking it? I definitely want some exposure to Austin Dillon. I think in that 40 to 60% range is fine. Once you get above 60%, you're probably getting to the point where you're overdoing it on him because there are things that can happen, and I do think he'll be a very chalky play this week. Hashtag RV Live. How many dominators should we expect in Richmond? So I talked about this on the podcast earlier in the week. Of the last 8 Richmond races, we have 4 of them with a lot of dominators, like 3 or 4. And then in 2 of the races, we've had 2 dominators. And in 2 of the races, we've had 1 dominator. So about 50% of the races, we've had multiple. And then like multiple meaning more than 3 or more. And then the other 50%, we've either had 1 or 2. So can't really say. It's an interesting distribution there. So it's definitely going to be tough to pinpoint how many dominators. So I recommend doing a mix of different ones. Hashtag RV Live, Kyle Busch or Denny Hamlin for cash games. I would go with, that's a really good question, actually. Hamlin has a fast car this week. He's good at these flat tracks. He's good at these short tracks. This is probably his best track type, and you're getting him at a massive discount to Kyle Busch. So if that lets you put in somebody else expensive that you want to do, I would go with Hamlin. Now, if it's just a straight 1v1, it's probably a little more likely that Kyle Busch ends up dominating than Denny Hamlin, but it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility that Hamlin ends up, leading a portion of this race or even winning this race. So it's a very good question. Hamlin has a little more safety, obviously starting in 16th relative to Kyle Busch's 7th, if one or the other were to encounter a problem. But I think if one or the other encounters a problem, it's just kind of dumb luck anyway, and they're both going to hurt you if they end up with a problem. So go with the guy that's more likely to dominate, which gives you a higher floor, I think, and that would be Kyle Busch. I don't think the difference between 7th and 16th wrecking out is going to be a huge difference. So I'm actually going to look for upside there in that. Hashtag RV Live, where's the best place to find the 20 and 30 lap averages? You can only get them on TV. That's where I get those, or through the TV when I watch practice. Hashtag RV Live, thoughts on Chase Elliott for GPPs. Talked about him a lot. I like him as a GPP play. Hashtag RV Live, what are your thoughts on Brad Keselowski? We talked about him. Speed doesn't seem to be there like Harvick. Yeah, those Fords, the Penske-affiliated Fords, which are, of course, Keselowski, Logano, Blaney, and then even if you want to throw in the Stewart-Haas team, they haven't seemed to be very fast this week. We talked about Harvick's times weren't that good. Looks like Clint Bowyer, he was probably the best of the Stewart-Haas cars with a 10th place single lap, 9th place 10 lap. Although Kurt Busch, like I said, we can't really tell about his 10 lap because it was later in the session. But Danica and Harvick were certainly a lot slower. We've got the Penske guys who have been outside of the top 10. So those Penske, Stewart-Haas affiliated type people, drivers, certainly I think are tough plays, but you can never count out somebody like Keselowski or Harvick. Hey, Rotodoc, help me understand Larson versus Busch as it relates to the optimizer in cash. I think, don't really think about the optimizer, just figure out which one is the better cash game play. I think in this case, you probably want to go with Kyle Busch. He's got the better track history here. He's also more likely, I think, to dominate than Larson. Larson burns up his tires on the long run. So he certainly has a fast short run car. And if we get a lot of restarts, I think Kyle Larson can be in play for dominating. If it ends up being a little bit of a wild race. Richmond doesn't tend to be that way, although you can never rule it out. We get about 85% of the laps run under green here, whereas other tracks are around 80%. So I think in this case, I'd rather have Kyle Busch in cash if I'm picking one or the other versus Larson, because Kyle Busch is more likely to dominate. He's got the better long run car, and he has the better track history. What are your thoughts on Ty Dillon today? I did like him a lot from his price, 6,100, but he's been really slow this week, and actually the RCR cars are another team that's been pretty slow. So if you look at Ryan Newman, 18th and 21st in single and 10 lap average. You look at Paul Menard, 32nd and 33rd. You look at Ty Dillon, who's RCR affiliated in that Germain Racing car, 30th and 30th. And then we talked about Austin Dillon, only 24th and 18th. So RCR doesn't seem to necessarily have the best grip on these cars this weekend either. So I did like Ty Dillon from a price standpoint. I think you can have some exposure to him, certainly, but I don't think he's the best play this week anymore. Hashtag RV Live, are the Kurt Busch battery issues a big deal? No, I mean, they'll just change. The race hasn't even started yet. They'll put in a new battery and if they need to or anything like that. Not worried about it. Hashtag RV Live, the top three drivers to dominate in GPP. We've already talked about that. Kenseth, Truex, and then somebody after that. Maybe it's Kyle Busch, for example. Hashtag RV Live, Allmendinger or Almirola in a GPP. I like Almirola, but I can certainly see a case for Allmendinger just based off game theory because Almirola will be the higher owned driver. If I look at Almirola and Allmendinger's projected ownership percentage, my model gives Almirola projected 12%. I think it's going to end up actually being higher than that. I think it's going to be probably around 25%. So I'd double that. I think, obviously no model's perfect. So I think Almirola is going to be around 25%. I think Dinger will be around 8 to 10% as he is projected in the model there. So, in terms of a theory play, I think Allmendinger is not a bad theory play. I think I like Almirola better because he's the more likely one to have a better outcome. He's had a better practice. He's got a good track history here. Granted, Allmendinger is pretty good at these flat tracks as well. Hashtag RV Live, is Richmond a race where you can leave some big chunk off of salary? I wouldn't think so. I'm not going to leave a huge amount of salary off the table. I think at most probably 1,000, 1,200 tops. I don't even have any that go that far. I think 800 is probably where I'm capping myself at. Hashtag RV Live, hashtag RV Live. That was a good question. How solid have you found the ownership projections to be thus far? Well, we've done them one race, and they had a really good, I tweeted out, they had a really good fit, 0.745, so essentially 0.75 R squared. So my ownership projections explain about 75% of the actual variance in real ownership percentages. So going to continue to try to improve it. I've got some things in mind to continue and improve it, but I'd expect in the long run about 70 to 75% correct, in terms of variance explained. So that's very good. That's strong. And I think as we get a few more races under our belt, we'll probably push up above 75%. Hashtag RV Live. How do you feel about running out both Dillon brothers in GPP? Obviously, Dillon's a fine play. Austin Dillon's a fine play. And then you compare him with Ty Dillon. Sure, I don't think that's a bad roster construction. I don't know what the upside is there, so I wouldn't do it in too much. Hashtag RV Live. Surprised you haven't talked about Hamlin yet. I have talked about him a little bit. I said there's definitely potential for him to dominate. We've talked about him versus Kyle Busch. I like him as a GPP play a lot better than I like him as a cash game play. I think he's a great GPP play this weekend. Denny Hamlin has a chance to win this race. Hashtag RV Live, what percentage of the time will there be 1, 2, 3, 4, or more dominators, respectively? It depends on the track. I just talked about them for Richmond. In this case, 3+ has been 50% over the last 8 races. 1 and 2 have been 25% each. Haven't heard you talk about Jimmy Johnson today. Thoughts? Yeah, I haven't talked much about Jimmy Johnson today. And he does have a decent car, it looks like, from the practice times. 3rd in the single lap, 11th in the 10 lap, so maybe not quite as good in the long run. I think, obviously, when you get Jimmy Johnson starting there in 17th, he's in play. He's at a $400 discount to Larson, who starts right next to him in 18th. So, I think Johnson's a good pivot play off of Larson. I don't see any reason to not play Johnson. Not a bad play at all. Let's see, I lost my spot here. Hashtag RV Live Hamlin for cash. I think I'd probably avoid that route, but it's certainly not impossible. I actually need to look at my cash game lineup. I don't even know what I'm doing right now. I currently don't have Hamlin in cash. Like I said, I don't think it's impossible, but if I were to do like Kyle Busch versus Denny Hamlin, I'd have Kyle Busch. Now, they're not in the same price point. One's $1,300 cheaper than the other, so I certainly, if you can fit both Kyle and Hamlin, that's a viable construction. I like Hamlin better than Jimmy Johnson or Kyle Larson for cash games, for example. I think Hamlin has a better car than both of them, the better track history than both of them, better track type history than both of them, I should say, and he's got a better car and he's cheaper. So yeah, I like Hamlin in cash. I just don't know if that's the roster construction route I'm going to go. So it really depends on your roster construction route. I'm going to take a sip here. My voice is getting a little scratchy. No, it's not the Budweiser today. We got a lot of questions. This is great. We're 40 minutes into the show. We probably got another 10 to 15 minutes worth of talking questions, for example. So, if the questions run dry, we'll end the show a little early. But if you got questions that continue to come, by all means, please continue to ask them. So, hashtag RV Live. Bain and Austin in the same lineup, okay, ? So I guess that means Austin Dillon and Trevor Bain. Of course that's okay. Those are the two chalkiest plays you can make. They're going to be chalky, though, so you're going to need to find some other ways to differentiate in your lineup. Hashtag RV Live. This is a good question. Can you play Hamlin, Kyle Busch, and Truex in cash? Yes, you can definitely do that roster construction. If you want to take multiple shots at dominators, I think you're probably going to be foregoing Kenseth there, which is a little bit of a risk. But like I said earlier in the show, I don't think fading Kenseth in cash is the worst play this week. He doesn't have the fastest car. He has a fast one. I don't think he has the fastest one. He is very good at Richmond, though, so he's a tough fade in cash. But I think if you're going Hamlin, Kyle Busch, Truex, let me play around with this. Actually, I'm gonna check this construction out. Truex. Let me click a few buttons here. Truex, Hamlin, Kyle Busch. So that leaves you with $7,000 per driver. Let's say you wanted to put in Kenseth, you could. Then you're left with $6,100 for two drivers. So you're probably going to need to do something where you use a punt play and maybe like Bane or Dillon. But that means you're playing either one of Bane or Dillon or the other. You're not playing both. Alternatively, you could forego Kenseth. You could play Bane and Dillon. So let me enter those two in. Trevor Bane, Austin Dillon, and then you've got some decisions there as well. You've got $6,800 left. So some different roster constructions. It's a viable one. Definitely, I think it's a viable cash game roster construction. Hashtag RV Live. You mentioned Blaney / Keselowski as a contrarian stack. Do you have any others? So I think, like I said, they're a contrarian stack. I don't love the play because their practice times weren't that great. Looks like Penske might be off a little bit this week, but certainly if they maybe set their cars up for the end of the race or the track changes or they made some changes overnight and they find something, that could be a contrarian stack. Any others? I think maybe like Casey Kane and Jimmy Johnson would be an interesting contrarian stack. Let's say Hendrick finds something. You could even throw Chase Elliott in there. So maybe doing like a Hendrick type stack. Other than that, I think you just kind of not really looking to stack any particular teammates. Hashtag RB Live. Is Eric Jones safe for cash? I think he is safe for cash. He starts 20th, so that's pretty good. He's had some decent practice times. I need to go over, flip my other screen and pull those up. Eric Jones practiced 4th in the single lap, 14th in the 10 lap, so not terrible. He's got a decent track history at like Richmond and Iowa, for example. So the thing about Richmond and Iowa in the Xfinity series and in Phoenix, again, they're flat tracks. They're anywhere from 1 mile to 0.75 miles. Iowa is 7/8 of a mile, so it's in between Richmond and Phoenix in size. But they're all those D-shaped ovals that are flatter. So Eric Jones ran really well on all three of them in the Xfinity series. So I expect him to have a good race. The question is what is his upside? But I think he's safe for cash, yes. Where do you get the 30 lap times that you mentioned in your article? I just talked about that. It's just something I got off of TV. So Kyle Busch had the fastest 30 lap time. I talk about this every week. The only place I get those is on TV. The only one that NASCAR makes publicly available is the 10 lap average data. So at this point, I don't have any other hashtag RV Live questions. If you guys have any other questions, shoot them forward. If I don't see any roll through my timeline here in the next couple minutes, because I know we're probably on just a tiny bit of a delay. But if there's no other hashtag RV Live questions, we'll probably end up wrapping up the show here in a bit. Just got one in. Hashtag RV Live. I haven't heard much at all about number 88. That's, of course, Dale Earnhardt Jr. What are your thoughts on 50 to 20% GPP just for narrative? I don't really buy the narrative thing here. It's not like Junior's going to go out suddenly and crush because he announced his retirement. I mean, it's not like Jeff Gordon went out and crushed when he announced his retirement, or Tony Stewart went out and crushed because he announced his retirement. I think at some point Dale Jr. will probably be in contention for a win. I don't think it's going to be here. I think he's still getting a little bit used to the car. I think there's still a bit of a feeling out period with the car where he was out, 10, 15 races last year. Richmond's a decent track for him, but he hasn't practiced very well so far this week. Got some figuring out of things to do, he tweeted out. So it doesn't look like they're the fastest. I don't think Dale Jr. is super confident this week. Got a couple more that just rolled in. Who's your favorite cash game punt under 6K? At that point, you're just trying to find the driver that's going to finish the highest of those that are under 6K. So probably Landon Castle. I don't know if I want to, go that roster construction route. However, just got another question about Dale Jr. Just talked about him. Last couple questions. What do you think of Clint Boyer today? I think he's a low-owned GPP play. I don't mind him. He practiced 10th and 9th in the single and 10 lap, but of course he also starts right around there as well. So in terms of where he practiced versus where he qualified, he starts 8th. He practiced just a hair slower in terms of ranking. 8th rank qualifying, 9th and 10th rank in practice. So, I don't hate him. He could definitely finish in the top 5 and could end up being in the winning lineup. I don't hate him, but I don't love him either. So he's a guy I'm kind of just like indifferent on. I don't mind if you use him. I just wouldn't have a ton of him. Hashtag RV Live. Kyle Busch and Hamlin or Larson and Jimmy Johnson for cash? That's a tough one. I like to go Busch and Hamlin. I think Larson's probably going to burn off his tires a little bit and not end up dominating. I think that's what you want from him. Whereas I think Kyle Busch has more chance to dominate, and Hamlin definitely has a chance to dominate as well. So I like the Kyle Busch-Denny Hamlin combo better than JJ and Larson for cash. McMurray and so Larson and JJ, actually, I don't mind as a GPP combination. Certainly, if you want to pivot off of Kyle and Hamlin and GPPs. Hashtag RV Live McMurray for GPP or 3 max. I kind of am in the same boat with him as I am with Clint Boyer. So, right, McMurray qualified 10th, and his practice ranks were 11th and 10th, so kind of the same boat as Boyer there. He's a little cheaper than Boyer, $700 cheaper, so I like him a little bit more than Boyer, also because he starts a couple spots further back. He has a very good track history at Richmond, so, if you're playing Boyer 5, 10, 15%, I think, McMurray, you can go 10, 15, 20% in that range. Got 2 more in here. That was another McMurray one. Just talked about him. Any 2 drivers you will not put in the same lineup due to negative correlation? I probably wouldn't put McMurray and Boyer in the same lineup, not because of negative correlation, but I think it's going to be tough for both of them to finish inside the top 8, inside the top 5 where they need to be in the winning lineup. So I wouldn't put McMurray and Boyer in the same lineup. Let's put it that way. Thoughts on David Reagan? I mean, I guess if you want to go that punt roster construction where David Reagan's down there in the Joe Dirt cheap type area, 5,900, that's fine. I think Castle's been a little faster than him this week. So, I'd like Castle. Castle's also $300 cheaper, but I guess Reagan's a decent pivot off of Castle if you're playing GPPs, but I wouldn't use Reagan in cash. He's just a really low-owned GPP play. Thoughts on Daniel Suarez? That's a good question. I actually haven't talked about Suarez yet at all. He starts 11th, but he didn't practice as well as McMurray or Boyer, so I think he's lower-owned type play than McMurray or Boyer. He didn't do all that great in the Xfinity Series race yesterday. I mean, he got wrecked out. He was up near the front, but he got passed by Daniel Hemrick, so I don't think this is the best situation for him as a rookie here. I would probably fade Daniel Suarez. All right, so we're about 45 minutes into the show. We got started a couple minutes late, so we're going to end this right here at about 45-minute mark of actual content. I really appreciate all you guys, tuning in behind the paywall. This is definitely for you guys. We want to make sure that our subscribers definitely get this exclusive information. So that is going to do it for this edition of RV Live, RotoViz Live. Really appreciate all the questions. I hope you helped you guys out. We've got another hour and 10 minutes, about hour and 10, 15 minutes until lineups lock. I will be setting a couple more lineups, so I don't know how active I'll be on Twitter. But if you have any questions, definitely feel free to shoot them to me. I just can't promise I'll get to them right away because I still have a couple lineups I need to fix up and edit and different things like that as well. Really appreciate the time again, and we'll be doing this again next week. I think Matt will be back with me next week. Like I said, he had the last couple minute things ended up coming up to take care of. So good luck this week, everyone. I hope to see you guys up there winning some GPPs.